If, like me, you were born in the 1960s, then you may remember the passenger trains of the Trinidad Government Railways. However, those who lived in the southern part of the island will surely remember carony trains from the sugar industry well into the late 1990s, trundling between Barapore and St. Madeleine. I was born and raised in San Fernando at a time when the TGR was in its twilight years. It was this experience which kindled my lifelong passion for trains and railways. My name is Glen Beadon. This is the story of Locomotive No. 11 of the Trinidad Government Railway, which today has been restored and is on display at Harris Promenade in San Fernando. In September of 2014, just over 2 years ago, the Borough of San Fernando began a project to restore one of San Fernando's most prized historic relics, the locomotive on the east side of the promenade close to the public library. This engine was once No. 11 of the Trinidad Government Railways, affectionately known by the public as the last train to San Fernando. The restoration project, spearheaded by His Worship Kazim Hussain, the Mayor of San Fernando, was supposed to be completed in time for the 50th anniversary of the rail last train to San Fernando on the 30th of August 2015. That target was not accomplished due to the degree of deterioration discovered inside the locomotive, which was more serious than originally anticipated. Thus, due to severe internal corrosion, many parts of the engine required reconstruction, and so the work has taken much longer. I visited the project in April of 2016 and was very pleased to witness the progress, which included construction of a new plinth under the locomotive. This was quite a big job because this required lifting the 28-ton engine so that this plinth could be constructed. I also was very happy to see the bodywork repairs and the application of the original TGR green livery. The new livery has indeed corrected 50 years of lost history, as the locomotive had hitherto been displayed in a non-authentic silver livery which was put on by the PTSE in 1967. Let's look at some history of Locomotive No. 11. Engine is quite historic in its own right. Engine No. 11 is the oldest and perhaps the most famous of Trinidad's locomotive to have survived. I've often been told by foreign railway preservationists that because of her age and history, the engine is worthy of World Heritage status and recognition. Engine No. 11 was ordered together with engine No. 12. Now that engine has long been scrapped. In 1893 by the Public Works Director John Edward Tanner, in readiness for the expanding seasonal crop traffic that year. Mr. Tanner retired from the TGR in that same year of 1893 after serving the railway from its early beginnings in 1871. So No. 11 and No. 12 would have been the last two engines ordered by the original railway administration. So it was indeed the end of a very interesting era in the history of the TGR. It's worthy of note that from 1874 to 1894, the Trinidad Government Railway was run by the Public Works and Railway Department, and from 1894 onwards, the railway was administered by its own general manager. Mr. Tanner's successor was Mr. William Edward Smith, TGR General Manager, in 1894. Both locomotives were ordered from Messrs. Kitson and Company of Leeds in England. The engines were completed in 1894, arrived in Trinidad in 1895, and erected at the TGR workshops in Port of Spain under the charge of Mr. John William Tomlinson, TGR Locomotive Superintendent. Today, No. 11 is the sole survivor from an original fleet of 20 engines, similarly constructed between 1875 and 1923 for Trinidad. Only one other member of this type of locomotive was ever built by Kitson for export to South Africa in 1876 and worked on the Natal Railway Company. The Kitson 440 tank design was destined to handle all mainline traffic on the TGR from its inception in 1876 until 1920, when the heavier 460 tender engines from Canada began to make their appearance in Trinidad. No. 11 could be found at the head of both passenger and goods trains on the TGR. She also extensively served the sugar industry, hauling cane specials along the many estate lines across the country. However, much more significantly, No. 11 was the very first TGR locomotive to haul a public train fired by oil rather than coal in 1918. This locally adapted invention made to burn Trinidad's native crude oil straight from local wells by Locomotive Superintendent Chalamont Rainsford Walker, brought greater economy to the TGR by reducing the cost of fuel per mile, as well as eliminating substantial yearly claims against the railway for line-side fire damage due to the exhaust of hot ash from burning coal. Oil was available locally at a time of war, when the importation of British Welsh coal was under constant threat from U-boat attack. On the 31st of August 1918, engine No. 11 made the first official triumphant run between Port of Spain and Arima, burning oil for the very first time, thus heralding the arrival of a brand new modern era on the railways of Trinidad. No. 11 was still in use up until 1965. By then she was only being used around the yard in Port of Spain and for light engineering movements between Port of Spain and St. Joseph. Actually, for many years, she could also be found working the pay train, which consisted of a locomotive, one coach, with security and a paymaster. After 1965, she was moved to the railway graveyard at St. Joseph. Now, the idea of saving No. 11 was originally conceived by the general manager of Texaco in the 1960s, Dr. Arthur Down, who was both an important TGR customer and a keen railway enthusiast. Dr. Down made the suggestion to the Minister of Transport, which led to the eventual preservation of No. 11. In August of 1967, No. 11 was hauled to Port of Spain in preparation and later donated to the Borough of San Fernando by the Public Transport Service Corporation, successor to the TGR, as a museum piece. Once described as a 5th anniversary independence gift to be proud of, No. 11 made her final journey from the railway yards in Port of Spain to Harris Promenade, not by rail, but by road, on Monday 20th of August 1967. So it can be said that she was the last engine, but not the last train, to arrive in the city.